Hello, everyone. Welcome to our relaunch of our Sparks program. My name is Angus McReynolds, and I am the Experiential Learning Coordinator for the Irving Institute for Energy and Society. I do support a variety of our programs here, mostly involving getting students out of the classroom to learn about energy and climate and the variety of ways we interact with those systems. And so one of the ways that I do that is through our supporting undergrads through their career and internship journeys through a variety of different ways. And so I hold weekly office hours on Tuesdays from noon to 1 in our building. So if you have any questions about energy and climate internships or career opportunities, just come find me or send me an email. So this program is a really fun program that actually we started back when the pandemic first hit back in 2020 as a way to engage both our young alumni and alumni of all different types and different fields and backgrounds, and just to highlight the different stories that people have with energy careers. In the 2 years I've worked for the Irving Institute, the one thing I've learned about energy careers is that no one has the same one. No one has the same journey or story and how they ended up somewhere. And so I am really excited to introduce Nick Britton, who's an associate at EFI Foundation, for our first speaker, for our first guest for our series. And so Nick is a 21, and during his time at Dartmouth, he did some research for the Irving Institute around exploring COVID-19's impact on regional transmission organizations and U.S. electricity markets. He spent some time being an intern in the sustainability office, and also helped to co-launch and co-run the Dartmouth Energy Alliance, the student club that's still running strong. Nick, don't worry, they just wrapped up their second hackathon this couple of weekends ago after Climate and Energy Week, so they're still going good. I won't say too much about what you do for work right now because that would ruin and spoil this whole session. Just for the folks who joined, we're going to keep this kind of loose. I have a few questions for Nick, but I'll turn it over to Q&A in about 20 minutes if you have any questions about what he does and the work he's up to. So, Nick, I'm gonna hand it over to you real quick for who are you, what do you do, and what brought you here today?
Sure. Well, thank you, Angus, and thank you to the Irving Institute as a whole for inviting me to speak tonight. I will say that the Irving Institute was a big part of my undergraduate experience. Even though for most of my time, they still weren't that much of a being yet on campus. They were in like one room up in the top of Baker for some time, and they were still trying to figure out exactly how everything would shape up. And they were like, "Don't worry, we're gonna have a building one day." And I'm like, "Wow, okay, you're gonna have a building one day." And then I've been up to campus recently, and they have a really nice building. So I'm a little bit jealous of the current students that they get to use it. But but yeah, so currently I'm based in Washington D.C. And I work for the EFI Foundation. Energy Futures Initiative is what the acronym stands for, and basically we're a nonprofit think tank that's focused on a variety of decarbonization technologies, figuring out the best policies to implement them and get us to a deep decarbonization future. And as far as where I came from too, I think it's largely based on my graduate experience. I was an environmental studies major with a government minor, so I sort of paired both the policy and the environment side in my undergraduate studies, and that's kind of carried through everything that I've done. Though I will note that early on, when I got to Dartmouth, I really thought I wanted to be a physicist, but I quickly decided that was crazy and I couldn't do it. So I made a quick switch to environmental studies after that. But yeah, and I think I could dive into sort of my Dartmouth experience if that would be interesting for people, just to see how that progressed, or or whatever. I mean, I'm happy to keep this other conversation too if anyone wants
Yeah,
to jump in.
I would love to hear a little bit about how, what your path through undergrad was like and how that led you to EFI, and maybe a little bit about some of the skills, you learned at Dartmouth, and the meaningful, impactful projects and experiences you had that led you to EFI and the career path you're on now.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think I'll kind of start with like the bottom line up front, and that's that Dartmouth gave me a really important skill, which is to know how to think really well. And working at a think tank, essentially, and everyone's like, "What is a think tank?" That doesn't really mean anything to me. But to synthesize information and come up with your own idea, and but have that backed with a lot of rigorous data collection and your own interpretation and your own perspectives on things. I think that's sort of what I got out of my Dartmouth experience, and it's definitely carried through in my work today. Um, but with that in mind, so I did, like I said, I was an environmental studies major, and I really enjoyed the environmental studies department, particularly because it's so interdisciplinary, right? You have professors that are all sort of environmentally oriented, but they're coming from different angles. So you have the like ecological economists, you have the policy wonks, you have um, the folks more focused on the social issues, and pairing all of those things together, um, sort of with that central point of the environment or an environmental issue. I really enjoyed thinking in that way and thinking from that perspective. Um, but like I mentioned, I did this minor in government because I was really just interested in how the political process works too. And those that undergraduate background sort of guided different internships that I did all throughout college. So the first one I did was actually working for the Nature Conservancy over the summer of my freshman year, and that was sort of the moment when I decided I was like, yeah, I want to stick in this environmental realm because I feel like this is the time to be working in the space and to be contributing to how we're going to mitigate and combat climate change in some capacity. And basically, my role there was to just go out into nature around New Hampshire because I'm originally from New Hampshire, so I was living with my parents back then. But to go out into the nature of New Hampshire and monitor different conservation sites to make sure that people were managing them correctly. But I got to go to really remote areas of the state where like no one had walked around for years on end, and just to see like those pristine environments was really exciting. It was also a little scary because it was pretty remote at times. But but yeah, so that like really solidified my desire to be in this sustainability space, and then led me into some activities at the sustainability office, and that's where I sort of put my foot into some of the energy issues for the first time. So that's when I worked for the sustainability office as their energy and utilities intern, doing work on the campus's energy transition. At the time, the plan was to transition to biomass. So a lot of the work that I did was looking at like developing the sourcing framework for the biomass and figuring out, do we need a biofuel to sort of supplement like the actual raw like wood or wood pellets that would be used for a biomass plant. What was really interesting about that is that I think the local application of something like that is really interesting to see firsthand because I was working with the campus sustainability office. We were presenting information to the administration. And at the same time, we were working with the folks at the energy plant to figure out what they thought about the whole thing and if they thought it would be feasible. because they know the whole logistics of running an energy plan for a campus like Dartmouth. And then at the same time, we were also dealing with what the community thought about it, because biomass is still combustion. It's still pretty dirty on a day-to-day basis. And it's only carbon neutral if you plant the trees correctly and monitor all of that correctly. So a lot of people around the community had thoughts about that and strong opinions. So it was really interesting to see that play out firsthand and be able to at least participate in that process a little bit. And then from there, I think the next biggest sort of like aha moment, I guess, that wanted to push me back into this the energy and sustainable energy realm was when I was studying abroad, also through the environmental studies department. And I did the foreign study program in Southern Africa, both South Africa and Namibia, for 10 weeks, 5 weeks in both countries. And while I was there, one of the projects that we worked on was working with local communities there on invasive species management. But it was such a deep experience and a very interesting one, because it paired a lot of what I had learned in the environmental studies major, combining the social, political, environmental, and economic things all at once, because they wanted to take care of the invasive species because it was ruining a lot of the land that they were using for their livestock. At the same time, they didn't have enough fuel wood to power their home heating or for cooking, so they wanted to use the invasive species as that fuel wood. But at the same time, they also wanted to make some sort of economy there. So then they wanted to create this program where young people in the community could be the ones removing the invasive species and selling the fuel wood that they could then bring home to their families and build some sort of an economy there. So we were working with the young folks, some of the elders in the community, the farmers, local authorities, and trying to figure all of that out at the same time was a really enlightening experience. And it also kind of it really made the point that like energy itself is a human right, for lack of a better word. It's an essential need for people, and so a lot of times people can't access energy on a day-to-day basis. So so that was another experience that really hit home for me, that I'm going to be working in this space, and promoting energy access for others. Angus mentioned this briefly, but after that, during the COVID years at Dartmouth, I was working for Irving for a bit, doing some research on electricity markets, particularly around the politics of electricity markets and how they were handling COVID, because we didn't really know what COVID would do to electricity markets, or how the transmission operators would respond to COVID. We were predicting that demand would shift to different hours of the day. And we were wondering if operations would change, and how, like, if they couldn't have as many people in the room, what that would mean for maintaining electricity supply for the different regions of the country. So it was really interesting at the time. And overall, I think there was some change in demand, right? Because people started to work from home long term and patterns changed like that. But it was a totally new thing, and we were just kind of working on it on the fly, because we didn't really know what COVID would amount to over the next year or so. And then after that is sort of what brought me to EFI. So I came to EFI after graduating as an intern, and I was started out working remotely, but then moved into a full-time position at the end of 2021. And I've been here since. I've now become a research associate at the company. And on the day-to-day, my work can cover a broad spectrum of different things, which is also why I've enjoyed working here so much. But like, for example, today I spent a lot of time doing data analysis on different environmental justice groups that we're hoping to engage with in the coming weeks. Sometimes it's data visualization for some of the data analysis that we've done. I also do a lot of geographic.
Can I just hop in real quick? So when
Sure.
you say you're doing data analysis for environmental justice groups, like what do you,
Mhm.
could you shed a little more detail into like what that looks like, what that means, and like what
Mhm.
kind of data and analysis you're doing for these different groups?
Yeah, for sure. So I think it might be useful to provide a little bit of background on the types of the different areas that I've worked in here. But a lot of my work has focused on um, both carbon capture technologies and hydrogen fuel, um, both of which are hot topics nowadays, especially at the federal level, with like the recent announcement of the hydrogen hubs program, those different hubs that were selected. Um, and I think one of the interesting things about EFI and our work is that we're really focused on these types of technologies because they're the ones that are kind of the most contentious, and we want to provide sort of an unbiased, data-driven analysis on them to see where they work best, how they work best, who are they best suited for, um, and in the case of the hydrogen hubs, like how can we best utilize these funds that have been given to actually create um, like a better energy future, whereas like unless as opposed to if we were totally against it, that pot of money would just not be used, right? So how do we use what we've got essentially to make sure that we can still keep trudging on, to get to a better energy future? So a little bit of background, but for example, today I'm working on one of our projects that's focused on the community engagement aspect of the hydrogen hubs, and what sorts of policies and recommendations would be most useful to encourage better engagement, particularly because um, a lot of the hydrogen that we have today is fossil based, and it's primarily confined to a lot of the oil and gas giants. So something like 90% of the hydrogen that's produced in the United States is produced in the Gulf Coast, and it's produced by an oil company and used by the same oil company to refine in their refineries to clean up their oil essentially. And um, it's no surprise to anyone that the oil and gas companies have done a pretty terrible job of engaging with communities in the past. So um, there have been a lot of policies at the federal level, such as the Justice 40 initiative, which designates 40% of any proceeds that come from the federal government and are used in different projects. They're dedicated to disadvantaged communities. Um, there's things like that, and then there's things like within the hubs program, there's a community benefits plan that's required that each of the hub selectees had to write up and provide their own perspectives on how they would be engaging with and benefiting the communities that they would be building their hubs in. So um, part of what we're looking at is how can we um, provide some additional data there to um, make that a better process for everyone, particularly for the communities where they're already overburdened, um, and it shouldn't really rest on them to be the ones that need to begin this, right? Um, Even though a lot of times they end up doing that through activism and whatnot, but basically, yeah. So all of the work is to just encourage a better process there. So, um, like today, my data analysis was categorizing those different groups into different subgroups, essentially, so that we can better understand Clay's landscape. Um, and we would pair that with a survey that we've done recently of individuals in different parts of the countries to get their take on what do they support or oppose hydrogen? Do they know anything about it? How do they feel about it? Like, what are their general thoughts around the hubs, if they know anything about them, that sort of thing. So we're sort of pairing those different threads of analysis together, and we'll use those to inform different policy recommendations that would be inputted into the hubs program. Now, we don't do any like lobbying or advocacy work, so everything that we do is just strictly research. So we do the work, we publish the report or the data. We have an event to say, hey, we just put out this thing. We've been working on it for the past few months. We think it'd be really effective to make sure that engagement is a better process for the communities. And then it's sort of up to the agencies, the developers, the different people that are playing in these spaces to take them. So that's why it kind of stops there for us. But
Yeah.
yeah, so that's a general overview of like how
Thank you.
my work fits into it.
And so I had one of the many follow-up questions that have been popping in and out of my head. Other than my most recent though is, so you just mentioned like you primarily do, EFI primarily does research and you publish research, but when you publish your research, is that a different process than what we over here at Dartmouth and academia might go through to publish something? Or so what does that look like from your perspective?
Oh, that's a good question. So it's definitely different than academic research in a few ways. One, the style is different because academic work is primarily for academics, or it's at least written at an academic level, whereas we are usually writing at like the policymaker developer level. So sometimes we have to just cut to the chase and then provide the details later, because we're realizing that the people that are reading our reports are usually staffers on the Hill, right? And they're trying to get the information as quick as they can from trusted sources that they can then provide to their congressperson or senator, so that they can like develop their policy that then they'll put on the floor and do their whole thing. So yeah, so the style is catered to that. We're very much like a sort of like I said, we're very much bottom line up front organization where it's like, this is what you need to know, and this is why it's important. This is what you can do about it, and now we'll go into the details of like how we got there. But at the same time, we still have some peer checks on a lot of our research. It's not just Nick does his research and then it's all of a sudden published. I mean, it goes through the ranks of the organization, and we also have some independent advisory boards that provide insight, third party insight into our work as well. And I think generally too, I mean, Angus, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the process is probably a little bit quicker than academia, because I feel like I've heard people have been waiting like years to publish some of their papers. So
Publishing in academia is a challenge. It can be months, years, multiple review periods,
right.
iterative feedback processes, and it can take it can take a really long time. Some things go through quickly randomly, and so, but
Mm,
I would, it's a journey. Is what I'll leave that as.
yeah, yeah, and I think, and um, it's, I mean, we a lot of the research that we include, like when we're doing literature reviews and whatnot, I mean, include plenty of academic literature. Um, but I think sort of the nature of our work is that we want to be researching and focusing on policies for technologies that are um, we're kind of on a tight deadline, right? Like for like the hubs programs right now are being negotiated, right? They're negotiating deals between developers and communities and DOE and everybody. That's happening right now as we speak. So our research has to be pretty quick, and it has to be pretty time sensitive because otherwise it's not useful. Like if we wait too long, or if we publish it too early and something else comes out, there's a report I was working on last year, also related to hydrogen, and we were planning to get it done. And we were coming close to wrapping it up, and then the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, sort of out of nowhere to most people, even in the DC space where everyone is nerding out about policy every day. Um, and then we basically had to scrap half of the report because we're like, well, now there's this tax credit for hydrogen, so um, now what's going to happen with that? So then that led us to do some modeling as far as like if you were able to access this tax credit using different types of technologies, how would that would you be able to access the tax credit? What would your emissions profile look like? Um, and then how could that incentivize users on the other end to use hydrogen down the road? Um, so those sorts of things always come up too. So we have to stay on the pulse of the policy world too, because it can change in an instant and definitely impact how we do our work and what we work
Can I ask a question following up what you just said?
on.
Um, so is it really coming, like, is the topics that you start researching coming from like your company just following the news and seeing where they think they need more information? Or is it more like outside people like policymakers asking for more information to inform their decisions? Like who is like kind of assigning the projects that you're working on, and like why do those get assigned?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So it's a little bit of two things. One of which you mentioned, like we decide that we want to focus on a particular thing, and we pursue that. Um, but another thing is because we're a nonprofit, a 501c3, um, we uh, we take philanthropic donations from groups, and usually the funders will be like, we want to fund research on carbon sequestration, and then that's kind of where they leave it. They're like, we know you do good work. We know that you'll find important information on carbon sequestration, um, but uh, but there's not that many strings attached. We'll check in every once in a while, but usually that's sort of where it ends. And we still have a lot of independence as far as one choosing the specifics to focus on, and then ultimately the editorial independence as we go through different rounds of review um, and sharing it with different people before we publish, to make sure that we can stay like nonpartisan, unbiased in a lot of the research that we're doing.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure.
And how long does a research project normally last? Like you're saying you have to kind of keep up with the quicker schedule. So like how long are you researching one thing before you switch to a new one?
Ooh, it can vary. I mean, I've been working on hydrogen for pretty much 2 years now, just because new things keep happening with it and new policies keep getting passed. Um, but as far as like the specific tasks that I'm working on, it changes. Sometimes it changes by the minute, sometimes by the day. Um, whether or not I'm doing the data analysis stuff that I was talking about earlier, or if I'm like making a map for some of our analysis, or actually writing the report, or presenting it to people. A lot of that can change, and I have to sort of turn on and off different parts of my brain throughout the day. Because sometimes I'm like coding something, and then the next minute I have to present it to people that have never heard of it. So you kind of have to be ready for those different applications of what you're focusing on, which is exciting. And it can be a little bit overwhelming at times, especially if there's a lot. But it at least keeps me on my toes. It makes my work a little bit more exciting than if I was just like doing the same monotonous task every day.
I read in like one of the reports, I think it was the bioenergy and carbon capture and storage one, and it said that like carbon capture and storage, although it's like such a small percentage of like all the work we're going to need to do to meet Paris climate goals, like it's still a necessary part, because we won't be able to meet Paris climate goals unless we start like offsetting carbon from like, I guess, existing emissions that we already have. So I was just wondering like what your thoughts are on, I guess, how you feel about researching like more subsidiary forms of like carbon emissions reduction instead of like solar and wind and hydro.
No, that's a great question. I mean, it's personally, I'm not like the biggest fan of carbon capture. I wish we didn't have to use it, and I wish that we could just like I wish we didn't have to use it, but at the same time, since we do, I wish it was cost effective, so that we could just stick it onto a plant tomorrow night and start capturing that carbon. But I think you hit the nail on the head. We're kind of at a point now where we kind of have to use all the options on the table. And is it the best one? Probably not. But is it something? And is it gonna at least create some net positive down the road? I think so. But yeah, I think working on those technologies, it's interesting for two reasons. One, to that end, just that it's a little bit not as like in particular BECS, the technology you were mentioning. That's a huge component of the IPCC's models for carbon reductions through 2050 and 2100. They're like, they say there's going to be this huge portion of bioenergy with carbon capture in the world that's going to be creating negative emissions. That'll help us get the curve way down. But BECS isn't used anywhere today. There's maybe one plant that's kind of doing it as a demonstration, but it's non-existent. So we were asked by a funder. They're like, hey, we saw this in the IPCC that there's this thing called BECS, but no one knows about it. No one's talking about it, but it's this huge component of their models. So what can you just give us some information on that? Like, what do we don't even know what that is. So that was what a lot of our research was like, is this technology that the modelers are saying is going to be a huge component of getting us to net zero? Like, is it even possible to do? And if so, like, where can we do it? So being able to work on those sorts of topics is interesting, because right, they're sort of forgotten, but they're also essential based on what the scientists are saying. But they're also contentious too, because bioenergy can be a very contentious topic, and so can carbon capture. So it presents both opportunities and challenges on how we would actually apply those things.
Like I guess
go ahead.
perspective, like it's a little frustrating because it's not cost effective and like no one's ever done it. But like for me, I'm thinking about engineering. So like maybe that would be a great engineering idea, would be like to explore that or to see if it's possible, because it seems like the technology needs to get more advanced before we can actually like market it.
Definitely. Yeah, and a lot of our reports too, we usually have entire sections that are focused on the research and development needs for these technologies, because most of them are still in the pretty early stages. But hydrogen included too, because to create renewable hydrogen through electrolysis, where you can split a water molecule into hydrogen and oxygen using electricity. Electrolyzers are still really expensive, and it's still really expensive to do that process, and it takes a lot of energy to do that process. So, but every day people are working on it. People are improving those technologies. It's just a matter of, are we devoting enough resources, enough funding, enough interest to those things so that they can ramp up at the speed that we actually need them to use these different tools. And I think another interesting thing too is that sometimes these technologies have bipartisan support as well. Like hydrogen and CCS are both pretty liked bipartisanly. That's why they're in the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed in 2021. So again, it's sort of that, like, these probably aren't the best options, but it's what we've got, and everyone's in support of it. So this is one avenue to move forward on how we actually get cleaner energy in a bunch of different sectors.
Nick, I have a question. It's not selfish, but so a part of the energy immersion trips that we run through the Irving Institute, we'll be going to Houston, the Gulf Coast region, to learn about the energy transition from a variety of perspectives.
Mhm.
And actually, it's one of the things you mentioned during your intro was that focusing on how there's a lot of big oil companies and big are doing a lot of work around the hydrogen sphere, and so we'll be meeting with representatives from ExxonMobil during our visit there, who will be talking about their carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration projects, as well as their hydrogen projects. And so, if you had that opportunity, what questions would you want to ask that group right now? That's on your mind.
Well, I think it's definitely skewed by the project that I'm working on right now, which is focused on the community engagement stuff. So a lot of my questions would be geared towards, like, have you talked to the people down the road yet about what you're doing? Have you talked about how that's going to impact them? Because yeah, I think an interesting piece is that as we've been doing this work, and we did a workshop on hydrogen that was based in the Gulf Coast, and it was basically discussing how can we transition the existing industry to clean hydrogen, right? And it was actually really interesting because a lot of the oil and gas companies didn't feel comfortable participating for probably a variety of reasons. Probably the biggest one being that there was at the time some competition around the different hubs that were being proposed in the region. So people were kind of picking sides and didn't want to engage with the other people. But it also meant that what we try to do with these workshops is to encourage dialogue between people that wouldn't otherwise be talking to each other. So like we bring in community representatives, labor representatives, policy representatives, and and the developer side and the like the private sector, and want to hear from each of them. Like, what do you think about this? How do you think it can actually be implemented? What do you need to hear from each other in order to get this done? And so when one of those legs of the stool, so to speak, is not willing to engage or not willing to engage to the right capacity, the stool's going to fall over, right? So, yeah, I think a lot of what I would be interested to hear about is what are they doing on the back end? How are they engaging with people? How does that process look? How are they even engaging with? Because I know that Exxon's in one of the hubs now in the Gulf Coast. And I'd be interested to hear how companies, how they're dealing with the politics as well. Just because this is such a new thing, that thing that the United States has never done before, just devote a sum of money to an entirely new industrial process or industrial sector, and just sort of see how it goes. So yeah, I'd be curious to know how they're working on that.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to hear your perspective on that. I have another question for you. I was wondering if you had any mistakes that you made earlier in your career that you'd be, that you've grown from since starting. I've made plenty since I've started here at the Irving Institute, and I've really grown a lot from them. So I was just wondering if you had any examples of moments like that.
It's a good question. I think I don't know if it was necessarily one instance, but I was definitely someone, even in college, that was pretty afraid to ask questions about things. So when I got into like the workforce, it was a really steep learning curve, and there were times where I felt like, oh, I don't want to seem like I don't know what I'm talking about. But the one thing that I've learned, especially within this space, is that you will not know what you're talking about when you enter this role, because that's sort of just the nature of it. You could study as much as you want, but when you get into a position at a company, there's going to be so many specific things that you're going to have to figure out together in different intricacies of that process that you'll just have to kind of apply. But in that experience, definitely be willing and open to saying to someone, hey, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah, giving yourself the grace that like you're new and you're learning a lot in this new position, right? Like,
right.
My undergrad prepared me really well to how to approach questions and problems, but doesn't mean I was ready for everything. So yeah. I'm thinking that you're still learning and advancing and growing as a person and a professional.
Right. Yeah, and I'm still learning every single day, and I think too, this type of a work environment, a lot of the folks at EFI are really great people and very comfortable doing working with me and helping me out and that sort of thing, but also just working in sort of this like policy research world. There's always going to be like, you're diving into some random agency's website and you're going into like the program that they had 20 years ago that was talking about like, I don't know, I've done some really crazy rabbit holes of looking for information on things, and like I had to figure out what how many boats the Coast Guard had at one point to see if like, oh, maybe the Coast Guard would be an interesting hydrogen application. So then I was like diving into a bunch of really old Coast Guard documents about how big their fleet was. like those sorts of things. Like, you have to kind of be open to not knowing what's next and being comfortable with that. But then also being comfortable with like, well, now I gotta know what I'm talking about pretty quickly, and figure out how I can make this like compelling, or get all the data that I need to get in order to provide my coworkers with what they need in order to make this a compelling recommendation. So it's kind of an interesting pairing where a lot of times I'm going into spaces that I don't really have any familiarity with, but then I come out of them with a much broader knowledge of whatever topic I'm working on.
I was wondering, do you spend a lot of time on the computer for your job, or like do you get to balance it with like presenting and like working on presentations?
I do spend a lot of time on my computer, and it has been bad for my back for sure, sitting down all day. But I do get to balance it a decent amount. Unfortunately, like if I'm presenting on the computer, then that's really no different. But as I've stuck around at the organization, I'm getting more and more opportunities to engage with different people and present on things. Go to different conferences or talks that other groups are having. I think one of the cool things about working in DC is that there are a lot of other groups that are doing very similar stuff to us, that are doing research and coming up with new ideas at the same pace. So there's always opportunities where, like, hey, this group is hosting a talk on solar development in the Midwest on Tuesday. So I'm gonna jump over there for a couple of hours, listen to what they have to say, talk to some people, build some connections, build some relationships there. And that's really interesting. It's really fun to do that. One, to build your own network and to hear other people's experiences, but also to just dive into something completely different from your work too, and just be able to sit and listen and hear what other people have to say about the topic. I always really enjoyed doing that kind of stuff. I wish I could do it more. I wish I didn't have to be in front of the computer all day.
I want to note that we're almost at the top of the hour, and so I was hoping to end on the question, what's next for you, Nick? Do you have any thoughts of where you want to head next in your career and what the path forward looks like for you? Or are you just kind of in the moment right now and kind of enjoying the experience that you're having, or a little bit of both? I'd love to hear any of your thoughts around that.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely a little bit of both, but I am planning on taking some new career moves in the near future. Primarily thinking about getting a professional degree down the road. Still related to
You coming back to Tuck?
maybe. I want it to be a little bit more environmentally focused. I think, but yeah, and as opposed to doing like a more academic degree, like a PhD or whatever, but still want to stay in the energy space and the environmental space, but sort of have that extra level of knowledge and management experience to help me continue in my career. But I think too, now that I've had an experience here, which I've really enjoyed, and I have really no issue with, and I would highly recommend that at least for some time do some research, whether it's like academic or otherwise. I think it can give you a lot of really great skills. But with that in mind, also, like, I'd be super interested to move into the government and do some work there, at the federal level or the state level. And I would even be interested to like move into a private company for some time and work on some of their sustainability initiatives or something along those lines. I also think it would be really neat to be like a project developer and work on like solar development or wind development in different parts of the country, for the world even. So I want to continue to keep those doors open. And I think that a little bit more school is potentially what I need to get. But yeah, still a little bit of.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, there's a lot of options out there in energy to move forward right now. So really exciting space. Nick, I just want to say thank you so much for helping us relaunch this program.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I want to thank the audience, the 3 different Melissa Weinsteins who are on the call right now. That's a Zoom error for some reason. So thank you all for coming. I have to plug our upcoming events because that is like 70% of my job sometimes. Just want to flag a few things for some people on the call. This weekend, we have Amory Lovins, who's the co-founder of the Rocky Mountain Institute, giving a talk on radical energy efficiency, integrative design, and applied hope. That's this Saturday at 4:15 p.m. and there'll be a public reception following the talk. And as we continue our Spark series, we'll have Mila Anderson, who is works for Representative Ann Custer, who's one of the Democratic representatives from New Hampshire. She is a policy advisor for Representative Custer, and we'll be giving the next talk in our series. Nick, again, thank you so much. I saw you popped your email in the chat. I really wanted to say thank you again for your time this evening. I really appreciated hearing all your wisdoms and all you had to share. So thank you so much.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks again for having me. I'm glad I got to chat with you all, and drop my email in there if anyone wants to reach out and connect a little bit more. If you have any questions or just want to chat about different things going on in energy, I'm totally game. So yeah, feel free to send along something.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your night.